Oh my goodness, I feel very, very sparkly. Sequins are everywhere at the moment. I wanted to get in on the action. I actually bought this sequin fabric last January in the sales from Fabric Godmother, so I was a little bit ahead of the time. It is beautiful and I absolutely love this. So I thought I would share with you a little bit about sewing with sequins. Now, I hadn't sewn with sequins before I made this top, so I've been learning along the way, and I thought I would share some tips and tricks with you. So sequin fabric can come in a few different forms. It can be on a woven fabric, a stretch fabric, or a mesh fabric, and it can be glued on or sewn on. The first one that I am going to show you, not the one that I'm wearing, is this rather beautiful red mesh with teeny tiny little sequins that are glued on. We had this fabric in December's Sew Hayley Jane boxes as the supplementary fabric. And like I said, it's just on this glittery mesh base and the sequins are glued on. So they don't have the little hole that most sequins have on for sewing them. They're glued on in straight lines and it just gives this really lovely, subtle sparkle. I think it's beautiful. Then you have the type of fabric that I'm wearing today, and this is sewn on sequins. Quite often sewn on sequins can be just one colour or two colours, or they can even be two tones. So there's one colour on one side, another colour on the other side, and they're sewn to the top of the sequin so that you can brush them up and brush them down, and it gives that mermaid sequin effect, especially popular in kids' clothes. This one has two different colours that are sewn on to a stretch mesh background. This sequin fabric is sewn on in straight rows, giving it a nice sort of uniform effect. However, you can also get sequins that are sewn on in a much more densely packed, haphazard way, like this rather special one that I picked up from Sew Confident. Oh my goodness, it is absolutely stunning. The sequins are sewn on sort of almost in clusters, so they're all haphazard. They really catch the light, and they're sewn on to a single-sided velvet. Then you can see where the thread is running all over that's sewn the sequins on. Oh my goodness, this is special. I have this one set aside to make something for my daughter Mia, although now she's seen this, she basically wants a replica of this as well. So I've got a lot of sequin sewing in my future. This isn't going to be made in time for Christmas, but it's her birthday in February, so that's my goal. So the top that I have made is actually a mashup of two different patterns. It is the Sew House 7 Tabor V-neck top with the Tilly and the Buttons Billy sleeves. Not these are like the straight sleeves, but the balloon sleeve version, which I have sewn quite a few times, and I just love the way it looks. Now, I did do myself a bit of a mischief because these sleeves need gathering, and gathering sequins is not easy. It can be done, just bear that in mind. If you go for a sweatshirt with sleeves as the sequins, go for one where the sleeves are sewn flat and there's no gathering, just to make your life a little bit easier. However, like I said, this is the first time I've sewn with sequins and I managed it, so it can absolutely be done. Now, the Tabor sweatshirt comes with dropped shoulders, which I didn't want to go for with this. So I layered over the Billy bodice, redrew the armhole, and sort of merged it together. I just very gently, I used a French curve to help as well, merged the two patterns together and then cut out the Billy sleeves as per the instructions. The only thing I have found with the Billy before is that the shoulders are really, really wide on me. I did re-sew the sleeves, taking them in a little bit more, but they were still hanging off. So I just did a little after the fact dart down here just to bring that shoulder seam in a little bit, and I'm really, really happy with it. I think they're now hitting in exactly the right place. So yes, I'm very, very happy. Now, sewing the cuffs was probably the trickiest bit because there is a lot of sequins in there. So here are some tips and tricks for sewing with sequins. To cut out your fabric, the best thing to do is cut it out in a single layer cut on the reverse of the sequin fabric and use a rotary cutter and cutting mat. It does mean that you will have to sort of move the pattern around a little bit to get it on the cutting mat as you go. Take your time, use a rotary cutter, and it will slice straight through those sequins as long as the blade is nice and sharp. Obviously, as you're cutting in a single layer, you will need to flip the pattern piece over so that you are mirroring the other piece of fabric. So the sleeves, obviously, I cut one sleeve, then I flipped the pattern piece over and cut the other sleeve. Now, best practice says to remove the sequins from where you will be sewing your seam. Good Lord, that is time consuming. I did it with these along the sleeve head, and I'm glad I did because of the gathering. However, I got fed up of cutting off the sequins. I got so bored, so I decided to have a go at just sewing through the sequins. And it worked out okay. It did. It worked out okay. So I would recommend using either a sharps needle or a denser needle like a denim or a leather needle for something a bit more sturdy. Be warned, I've told you what you should do, and I've told you what I did because I was lazy and got bored. Sequins can be quite scratchy, so I do recommend having either a lining or an underlining in your garment. I opted for underlining. So the difference between a lining and an underlining is how they are sewn. An underlining is basically you cut your, for example, you cut your sleeve piece out of your sequin fabric, and then you cut another sleeve piece out of whatever fabric you want to be on the underneath. I went for a viscose jersey. This is a Ponte Roma. So I went for a viscose jersey because it's a jersey fabric, it's a jersey garment, and it's nice and soft. So you cut the two pieces of fabric, I basted them together just to stop them from slipping around, and then you sew them as one piece. So it's up to you whether you go for a lining or an underlining. A lining obviously would conceal the seams, meaning that they're a bit less scratchy. Because I have just done sleeves and they are balloon sleeves, the seam line under here is open. There are sequins on the inside, but because it's a balloon sleeve, it's not dead against my skin, so it's quite comfortable. On the sleeve head, I ironed it so that this fabric, the Ponte Roma fabric, is covering the sequins, and I did the same with the cuffs as well. So my other tip then, if you are sewing a fabric that is stretchy in a garment with stretch fabric, I recommend using Maraflex thread. This is a thread that has some stretch in it, meaning you can sew a straight stitch that will still stretch and not snap, and that means if you're avoiding the zigzagging, there's less chance of catching those different sequins, because sequins can then fly off and go everywhere. It can be a little bit dangerous. So I would try using Maraflex thread. You just pop it in your bobbin as usual, sew it as usual, a straight seam. It's just a little bit more simple, a little bit easier. I opted to sew with the sequins on the top. This meant that the needle pierced the sequins and went down into the jersey that was underneath. I kind of figured that if I had them on the bottom, they would more likely get chewed up by my machine and end up causing some damage. So I didn't want to do that. So I sewed with it on top. Have a few spare needles on hand. I didn't have any breakages during this project, thank goodness, but I have heard it can happen. So have a few spare needles on hand and just be aware that that can happen. The other thing to consider is pressing your seams. Ideally, try and finger press, or even don't press at all, because the heat of the iron can melt the sequins. And after having gone through all that preparation, it is the last thing that you would want to happen. If you do need to press your seams, use a cool to warm iron and use a pressing cloth. A piece of cotton, something like a fat quarter, would do the trick absolutely fine. Put the pressing cloth on top and just very gently, you can very gently press or even just hover with a little bit of steam over your seam. Do not directly apply the heat from your iron to your sequin fabric. So there you go, those are some tips and tricks to get started with sewing sequins. It can be really intimidating. I have been intimidated by sewing with sequins for a long time. This is the first time I've done it. I'm so pleased that I went for it now though. I absolutely love it. I'm going out with some friends tomorrow for a little Christmas get together, and I wanted something a little bit festive, a little bit sparkly, and I have seen everywhere sweatshirts with sequin sleeves. They're big news right now, and they're a really great way to have a go at sewing with sequins. It's a little bit less intimidating because you are only cutting out 2 pieces. That's it. The rest of a sweatshirt is really, really simple as well. I made it a little bit more complicated with this V neckline, and I did have to unpick and do it twice, but I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. And like I said, a little alteration with a dart in the shoulders, but it's not that noticeable, and I love it. I feel very dreamy. I'm very excited about wearing this now. I cannot wait. I hope you have a lovely Christmas if you celebrate, or if you don't, have a lovely, warm, cozy time, and I will see you all really soon with some rather big news.